Hello, I'm really glad you've tuned in. My name is Simon and I'm going to speak for around 15 minutes on a really important theme, hope in suffering. This is a talk that in one sense doesn't really need an introduction. Do I need to persuade anyone that suffering is real and an issue? We've seen the pictures in the news, haven't we? We've read the grim statistics and it's personal for all of us in some way, isn't it? Whether we've lost someone to this awful virus or we know someone who has, or whether we're feeling the effects of the lockdown. I really feel for you guys at the moment, whether you're stuck at home, unable to get back to uni, or just longing to see your mates and hang out with them again. And you poor freshers, I mean, this absolutely isn't what you signed up for, is it? I don't know how well you know the Bible as a book. Actually, it's less a book and more like a library full of books, a collection of 66 books written over thousands of years. You could open the Bible at pretty much any page and it would be dealing with some aspect of human suffering. It isn't a fatalistic book, just grin and bear it, suck it up. It isn't a fantasist book. Everything's fine, suffering's all in your mind. This is a book that's real about what it's like to suffer in the world in which we live. But it's also a book filled with real hope. And not the kind of uncertain hope that we sometimes talk about. You know, I hope I won't get the virus. I hope I'll be able to get back to uni, see my mates soon. It's a confident hope because it gives us a hope in a person, Jesus of Nazareth. And I know that as I say that might sound incredibly strange to you. How could a man who died 2,000 years ago in Israel give certain hope to Exeter students in 2021? Well, that's what I want to try and explain for the rest of my time. And what you do with all of that is, of course, up to you. 3 reasons for hope that Christians find in Jesus of Nazareth. And here's the first one. God exists. God is real. God exists. Early in lockdown, I ordered one of these paint by numbers kits. I've got one here. You get sent 3 paintbrushes. You get 20 or so of these tiny little paint pots with numbers on them. You get the picture. This is what it's supposed to look like when it's finished, some kind of street at night scene here. And then, of course, you get the canvas. And if you look at the canvas, you'll see it's lots of little random squiggly shapes with numbers in them, which are probably too small to read there. You can see that I've started here with number 1, just random dark splodges, in themselves meaningless. And at this stage, this is pretty unrewarding. But the reason that you continue with it is because you're confident that there's design to it. It'll make sense when it's finished. It'll add up to something. It'll mean something, and it does. What about our life? What about the suffering we experience? If there is no God, of course, there is no sense or suffering or significance to suffering at all. It's all just random chance. But if there is a God, though we might not see that significance ourselves in the moment, suffering means something. And this is where Jesus of Nazareth comes in to begin with. Because among several extraordinary claims Jesus made about himself, perhaps the most extraordinary is this, that he was God walking among us. And perhaps that's not as mad as it sounds. If we're at least open to the idea that there might be a God, wouldn't that God want to communicate with us, make himself known and to know us? And what better way to do that than to become like us on our level and live among us? Jesus of Nazareth lived on earth for 33 or so years, and he gave proof after proof that he really was the Son of God in how he lived. A level of goodness far above any goodness the world had ever seen before. By things he said, a teaching that would change the world for good. By what he did. Obviously, there are things that I can't do that a God could do. A supernaturally controlling nature, getting rid of sickness and illness without medical equipment, even overpowering death. And Jesus did them all in public, in front of eyewitnesses. He backed up his claims, that is, with public proof. Christians have become persuaded that Jesus of Nazareth really was and is the Son of God. And not only those predisposed to believe such things, but committed skeptics as well. And if Jesus is God, and therefore God exists, he's real, Well, suffering is still really hard, and Christians wrestle with why God allows all sorts of things to happen in the world. But the Christian knows that God is in control of it, and if he's God, he is big enough to have good reasons for it. But that's only good news if God is good and kind and cares. And that's the second reason for hope that Christians find because of Jesus. God cares. Let's say Jesus is telling the truth and he really is God walking on earth. What then is God like? We just need to look at Jesus. And when we do, we find a being of extraordinary compassion and kindness. Israelite culture was divided into the in crowd and the out crowd, the haves and the have-nots. And over again in the Gospels, we find Jesus spending time with the have-nots, the outcasts, the losers, the downtrodden and the beaten up. He's drawn to sufferers like a moth to a flame. He loves them, he cries with them, he celebrates with them, he understands them. Some of the religious establishment of the day found it annoying that only losers spend time with losers. It wasn't just that Jesus sympathized, he empathized. He experienced it himself. The Bible calls Jesus a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering. No one could ever say to Jesus, "You don't get it." He knew the low-level stuff, the very common human stuff, being hungry and thirsty and tired and in desperate need of a break. And then he knew bereavement. There's a stunning scene in John's Gospel with Jesus weeping hot tears of fury and sorrow outside the tomb of his friend. He knew bitter betrayal. One of his closest friends sold him to his enemies for cash. He knew desertion. The rest of his friends left him for dead. And then after a corrupt trial, he was executed. Crucifixion was such an awful death that Romans were advised never to talk about it together. Don't even think about it. But Jesus, the Son of God, voluntarily and innocently endured the worst death humanity could devise. No one could ever say to Jesus, "You don't get it. You don't care." He walked into our suffering. He took it upon himself. This is unique to the God of the Bible, as someone has put it, no gods have wounds, but you alone. When Christians suffer, it's still really tough, but they know that Christians understand they know that God understands their suffering, that he cares about it, that he cares about them as they suffer. When they speak to him about it, they know that he cares, he understands. But if he's God, can't he do something about it? And that's the third reason for hope that Christians find in Jesus. God will act. I've seen a few polls about this third lockdown, and people seem to agree that this is the worst of the lot, partly because we were all naive at the beginning. Remember how we thought it wasn't going to last very long? Partly because it's winter and everything's harder in winter, but partly because it seems unending. We have no closing date, it just rolls on and on. Human history feels a little bit like that in all of its suffering. Life can feel like that for many. Life is hard, and when's it going to change? And again, if there's no God, that's just how it is. Humans are born, they suffer, and they die, and that's all there is to it. But Christians don't believe that. They're convinced that history isn't an endless cycle of meaningless suffering, but a line, a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the end is a new world without a single trace of suffering and death. This world reimagined, this world perfected. We think, now this is fantasy. Pie in the sky when you die. But Christians aren't fantasists, they're simply following the facts. And one fact in particular, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. You might find the idea of Jesus' resurrection strange or even implausible. So have lots of people who have then found themselves unexpectedly convinced that Jesus really did rise from the dead. This is a book called Who Moved the Stone by a guy called Frank Morrison. He started to write the book to expose the resurrection as a myth, but by the time he'd finished, Morrison was persuaded that Jesus really had risen from the dead after 3 days. He describes his change of mind at the beginning of the book this way. He says, somehow the perspective shifted, not suddenly, as in a flash of insight or inspiration, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, by the very stubbornness of the facts themselves. The facts. Christians follow the facts, and the facts point towards the remarkable, that Jesus really rose from the dead. But why would it matter if he did? Well, think what it would tell us about Jesus. It would prove that his claims were true, wouldn't it? It would mean that he did have power as God over suffering and death. We can make vaccines, but death gets all of us in the end. But Jesus has gone 12 rounds with suffering and death and emerged the victor. Here is a being who doesn't only understand our suffering, he can do something about it, which is the other reason this all matters. Because God has promised that he will. The resurrection of Jesus is a little bit like a film trailer. When you see the trailer, you know that the movie's coming, and you know roughly what the movie's going to be about. Jesus' resurrection is like a trailer for the end of the world. New hope emerging out of death. A sign of a new world to come for all who will put their trust in Jesus. Christians live between the trailer and the movie, or if you like, between the creation of the vaccine and its full effects. Jesus' resurrection proves that God is going to fix this world when the time is right. He's proved it to us by raising Jesus from the dead, and he invites all of us to be part of this world by putting our trust in Jesus. Suffering is here for now, but not forever. And Christians know that because of Jesus. And that makes all the difference for the Christian. It makes all the difference for Steve, who told me this week that he's starting radiotherapy today, in fact Thursday, for prostate cancer. Or for my sister's friend Hannah, whose dad was killed outright in a road accident just before Christmas. Christians suffer along with everyone else, but they know that God exists, that he cares, and that he's promised a new world to come. This isn't about fantasy or fatalism. It's about the facts about Jesus of Nazareth, his life, his death, his resurrection. And my simple encouragement to you is to get to know him. Follow the facts about Jesus. Read one of the accounts of his life. Even better, read it with a Christian friend of yours. Might have to be over Zoom. Why not start with Mark's account? It's short and punchy, just 16 short chapters. Ask your questions. Look at the evidence. Follow the facts. Because people who follow the facts and come to know Jesus Christ find so much more than tears. They find hope.